Welcome to Behind the Campaign, the podcast where marketers pull back the curtain on some of their best campaigns. I have with me today Jenn Golding. She is the founder and CEO of Sapphire Strategy. Hello, Jenn.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Sure, no problem. We are talking about a very important project today, our public schools work. Can you tell me a little bit about how this came about? It's a nonprofit, a little bit of a hot button issue here in Indiana and in other states in the United States. So, can you tell me a little bit about how this came about?
Absolutely. So we've been working with this client for a little over 2 years. And one of the challenges has really been, obviously there's a narrative around public schools in the media and from schools. This organization is a collective of a variety of founding partners that wanted to really have like a multimedia initiative to share the good stories that are happening in public schools. Like anything, there's challenges, but when we were trying to think about this campaign, we have a variety of audiences that we have to go after. We have the general public, which includes, obviously voters, people with or without children in public schools. We have legislators, we have, the educators in the state. So with this campaign, really the goal was reintroducing the organization and our mission, but also reinforcing like, hey, there are positive things happening here. And here's what we're seeing. And also just obviously teachers feel like they have to do more with less right now. So really being their advocate for the great work that they're doing and rallying behind them.
And how long has this initiative been in place?
It's been in place for about 3 years. They had a kickoff event, I believe, in late 2022 or early 2023. And really, it just came out of a need. Obviously, when COVID hit, there, there were unforeseen circumstances with schools having to go virtual and schools trying to navigate that. So coming out of that, and then also coming out of, again, we do face challenges in the state, but there are active initiatives in place. Like, for example, literacy is huge. Children need access to good literacy education and early literacy education in order to be successful in life. There's a statewide investment in that literacy development, and we're seeing great results from it. On the flip side, there's students where, okay, maybe they don't have the traditional support at home, and teachers are able to give them some structure that's really still helping them be prepared for the next stage of their life, right? So for this organization, it's really like we really want to amplify the good stories because there are good stories. And with this particular campaign, we really want like the board for the organization is made up of a variety of superintendents and leaders in educational spaces. There are some superintendents from schools. There are some, executive directors from like supporting organizations like ISBA, the Indiana School Boards Association, or CISC, which is the Central Indiana Educational Service Center. It's not just schools, it's the organization supporting the schools. So we wanted to have a video that communicated a specific message that one would drive people in, both parents and both general public / parents, as well as the education audience that brought people in. And we knew that we were going to get a mixture of both positive and negative commentary. But like anything, like that's a learning opportunity. When we launched the campaign, we knew going into it, we were going to see some comments, but it's also helpful for us, like, okay, what are the comments and how do we use that commentary and share that with the right people so that there can be change?
So, obviously, this is a nonprofit which has its challenges, money being one, you have limited resources. It also sounds like you have a number of different organizations involved. Whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit company can be a challenge in and of itself when you have a lot of stakeholders, a lot of opinions
Yeah.
in the mix, and you're trying to come up with a marketing campaign that's going out to the public. What are some of the challenges that you've faced while working with this organization as far from a marketing and public relations perspective?
Yeah. So the good news is that the way the board is set up and the way that we interact with the board, as well as we also have a creative committee that helps us shape strategies and present them to the board. Luckily, for the most part, people are on the same page, and they also trust us as the marketing experts to present sound solutions. And of course, we value the varied perspectives, especially since they're in the education space. The challenges that we kind of had to think through were more externally facing as opposed to internally collaborating, because honestly, the approval process was pretty streamlined. So, number one, we have to, like, whenever we do a campaign like this, like, people don't automatically know that it's a nonprofit. So they assume that taxpayer dollars are being spent, and they're not. Like, that is coming from the founding organizations who are paying for those campaigns. So we have to include certain messaging. And even if we do, people will still make a comment, a negative comment. And then the second thing is obviously we live in a very loud digital world right now. And I very much take the approach of, like, sometimes it makes sense to respond to a comment and sometimes it doesn't. But there's also, like, obviously there's going to be trolls. Like, sometimes you're just going to have people who are, they are convinced of their perspective, and that's totally okay. You're allowed to have that perspective, but we only get 7% context from a text communication. 93% of communication is nonverbal. So when we read a text, like, we can't read inflection or tone or read body language. So something we had to kind of figure out up front was when and if, when are we going to respond to negative comments, right? Responding to positive comments is easy. It's when are we going to respond to negative comments? And for the most part, based on the comments, we did not respond to probably about 90% of them because, again, it was very clear. There was no point arguing with someone who had a specific perspective, right? But on the flip side, there were people who were commenting on our behalf, like, no, this and this and this. So really the challenge was more externally facing as opposed to everybody getting on board. Like, sure, there were changes and some content deliberation, but for the most part, it was, we knew what the goal was. We knew how to execute. Everybody trusted everybody's roles and responsibilities. It was just, how are we going to deal with the external perception or commentary?
What have you found to be your, most engaging or best performing channels? Because you have a website and you're on social media. I don't do you do emails? Are there other types of communication channels that what have you found to work the best in this case?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Well, I have found that there is a correlation between those who primarily vote and where they're active, right? So while we technically have social media accounts on Facebook, X, and LinkedIn is engaged from an education standpoint, like educators, practitioners, but for the most part, it's a lot of administrators are active on LinkedIn. We had run a paid campaign last year, and just found that one, the cost per click, the cost per engagement was much higher than it was on Facebook, and two, the engagement overall just wasn't as beneficial. So on Facebook from a paid perspective has been our most successful campaign. So we ran the reintroduction campaign earlier this year, and we got over 115,000 video plays, over 300 reactions, 200 comments, almost 80 shares. And then in addition, we had also increased by about 132 followers. But then we took a different approach not that long ago for a back to school campaign. And instead of focusing on engagement, we focused on likes. And that particular campaign, while we didn't see as much engagement, we still saw shares and reactions, not a lot of comments. We were able to increase overall for less budget by over 300 followers. I mean, and we know that Facebook has increasingly become pay to play, like all the different social channels. From my perspective, LinkedIn has the friendliest organic algorithm, but it doesn't include our entire audience. X has changed quite a bit, so we've deprioritized it as a channel. And then Facebook, interestingly enough, while we do see some ongoing engagement and we do post content there regularly, typically what we're seeing with clients across the board for an organic growth rate per year, it's only like 2 to 5%. Luckily, we've been seeing around 5% for this particular organization, but I've been surprised that Facebook has been our best channel. And I will say again, like if we think about who's voting, right? The older generations are voting. They are active on Facebook as opposed to Instagram or LinkedIn or so that makes sense. But I have been pleasantly surprised by um our success on Facebook. And then we have used emails, but we see that more as an assist channel, truly where we're seeing both organic and paid engagement. We are continuing to see more mentions and more shares overall, especially as we grow our followers with these paid campaigns. And while we can't tell completely, we can get a better sense. Like I feel like our following now, in the past, it was mostly educators. Now I can tell that there are some parents and students or grandparents who are following as well. So that's been
So it sounds like you're really kind of, you know, have been successful in growing into the audience that you had intended for this campaign to reach out to. I know part of this initiative is to kind of tell the good stories of the things that are happening in public schools. What are some stories that you have found that really resonated with people or that you even maybe personally found kind of really cool?
Yeah. So I will say I had alluded to it earlier. So one of the coolest stories that I'm seeing, and I want to make sure I'm representing this accurately. So let me bring it up. But with the literacy investment through the Indiana Literacy Cadre, we have I read the assessment, and they did a comparison between the schools who weren't part of the cadre and the schools who were. The cadre schools, let me just verify the statistic. I want to make sure that it is accurate. But yeah, in third grade literacy rates, there was a 7 percentage point increase in Indiana literacy cadre schools, or nearly double that of schools that did not participate in the cadre. So, I mean, that's significant, right? We can see that the investment is working. So, we want to continue to see that. Also, earlier this year, the nation's report card, NAEP, National Association of Education Progress, I believe it is. We were seeing, I'm just making sure I'm accurately representing this. So we jumped to 6th in the nation in literacy according to NAEP, which is exciting. And then we did see some progress in math as well. And then for 2024, the 2024 graduating class, 90.2% of students in Indiana earned a high school diploma, which is the highest mark in state history. And then, generally, the stories that come across our desk, like it's, schools investing in early workforce development programs, like in high schools, or, schools adding more extracurriculars. And it's just, I had the benefit of going to both public and private school. Um, I had made certain decisions when I was younger, but it brings it back. And I know whenever we're talking about education, there's the capital P politics and there's the lowercase p politics. But at the end of the day, the question is is education a right or is it a privilege? And for me, and for a lot of people that we work with, every child should have access to education, right? And they should have access to quality education. The reality is the American public cannot afford private schools for the most part. And children need somewhere to go, they need somewhere to engage, they need somewhere to socialize, right? Like, I'm fully on board with you have a choice of where to send your children, absolutely, but children need access to quality so that's why we're really passionate about supporting this organization and supporting the work that they do. And again, I support anybody's decision and right to choose where their children go, whether that's homeschool, private school, public school. But regardless of what you choose, children still need that access.
What are some of the big buckets of pushback that you generally receive around this initiative? I mean, you talked about the trolls earlier, which, we can disregard those, but like actual like concerns that people have. Are there kind of big themes that people that you see in responses to this initiative? And are you incorporating those into future communications?
Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying, I'm not an educator or a education practitioner, so they sometimes understand these challenges better than I do. But, a lot of times like there's still concerns around, there's still issues with absenteeism, there's still issues with like quality of life in Indiana, there's still issues with size of classroom, behavioral issues. Like, there's so many different things. And the thing is, like, some of those things teachers can't control, right? They can control what happens in their classroom, they can control what they teach, they can control certain aspects. But there are a lot of things that at the end of the day, it comes back to the house, right? And the support there. So, I I would say that generally going back to your question of do we include those in future communications? Sometimes we do. And again, that's guided by the board and the educational practitioners who have that knowledge and can help us figure out or who can provide that information to us and we can figure out how to communicate that in an effective way. But I would say I more so see it as, hey, we can communicate it all day long, but really, the more important thing to do is to share feedback in the areas with schools or other organizations and see how we can address it. Or I shouldn't say we, they can address it. So, like, I see it more as they're trying to take action instead of communicate, like, hey, like, we're working on it, if that makes sense. And I think for the most part, nothing that I said is a big surprise to, educational practitioners or administrators. It's more in every region, like not all schools are created created the same way, right? Like rural schools are going to have different issues than suburban, right? So it's figuring out how to serve, the students who are walking through the door and their needs and also, you have to customize learning plans based on student needs, but also figure out how to do that in a streamlined way. And I definitely can't speak to that, but it's important. So,
On your website and in your social media, you do tell stories and have imagery of students and faculty in schools. Obviously, from a marketing perspective, we're always hyper aware of privacy concerns and things like that. Have you found that most parents are happy to have their students involved in this project, their imagery or their stories? And like, how do you go about having that conversation with them?
yeah, so there's definitely a waiver for any of the school photos. So that's all taken care of. I would say, and this is just based on what I've heard from a variety of different parties. So in the past, it seemed like parents were very comfortable signing waivers. Yes, you can have photos of my students, you can use them as you see fit because it was a pride, right? My student goes to the school and I'm happy to see their face. I would say now that there's more digital predatory concerns, that has changed. So, there's always a waiver, right? There's never a photo without a waiver. But from what I've heard, there's been a decrease in the amount of signed waivers that have come through, or parents who are comfortable with their students being photographed or filmed. But yes, very cognizant of that. And while we don't want to use stock photos, like sometimes that's just the best option because I understand the privacy concerns, right? And I understand the images of children. So while we don't prefer to use stock photos, we definitely will when we need to.
I was very happy to see just a couple of weeks ago, I think you mentioned it, the new report that came out that said that reading comprehension and reading scores had increased in Indiana. I think for many years that hasn't been the case. So it's a good switch, a swing, if you want to call it, in our scores. How are you communicating that and connecting it back to the public schools kind of involvement in that and kind of this initiative?
Yeah, so you will see on our socials, like we try not to be repetitive, but you will see common themes, and sometimes we do promote things multiple times. So the reality of the situation is, like, and again, I'm not the practitioner, so take this with a grain of salt, but at the end of the day, the Lilly Endowment gave the investment for this a historic investment into this literacy um, initiative. Sure, like private schools or other charter schools or other organizations could get investments, but I don't think I've seen that type of investment in a private organization or a charter organization unless it was coming from private donors. And again, you can do whatever you want. Um, Ultimately, it makes sense to invest in public schools because for the most part, that's where the majority of students are going. So when we communicate this through social, so something we have to be mindful of is obviously it's in the name. Our public schools work, right? There's clearly a narrative that we're trying to promote. Um, and what we try to be very careful about is that we want to promote all the positive things while not ignoring the negative things. So, for example, like showcasing the impact and the growth, we still have a ways to go and we can recognize that, but we don't want to take away from the impact of what has happened. So ultimately, it really comes down to like what has been the impact for the students because those are students are who are matter and what type of outcomes or opportunities are they going to have as a result of the work.
You mentioned charter schools, and I think in Indiana, I don't know about other states, it almost seems like there's this narrative that it's kind of a binary. It's charter schools or public schools and kind of pitting them against each other, which I think you mentioned earlier, like we need both, right? We need options
Yeah.
for students, but there's also been some movement in the Indiana legislature to, eliminate school districts, some school districts altogether, and move much more kind of in the direction of having more charter schools. Is that something you address with this initiative or in any of your communications, or do you kind of primarily focus on what I've seen is that you've primarily focused on the positives about public schools without really kind of going into that other area?
Yeah. So it's definitely a topic that's come up, and so we're lucky that our board members like to be engaged and also provide op eds, especially about topics that they have seen. So it's definitely on the table in terms of a conversation topic. We may talk about it in a public op ed. It's hard, it's hard. So again, if we come back to 93% of communication is nonverbal, right? And we can tweak and message as much as we want for a certain tone, but at the end of the day, people are going to read in the inflection and the tone that they want. Ooh, there's only so much, like, whether it be an op-ed or a blog post or social post, right? There's only so much you can say and you can outline all your points. So I'm not saying we don't talk about it. I'm not sure if the board will want to talk about it, but it's almost, we have to decide, like, because once you post something like that shares a stance, it opens that can of worms, right? So is it better to use those resources to have conversations that are, either going to lead to legislation change or provide advocacy or, you know, open up different perspectives? Or do we try, there's just certain considerations that we have to like ask before we post anything. Cause at the end of the day, now anything you post about public schools for the most part is controversial, even if it's public or not, it's just controversial. So when you get into the charter school, and like you said, people need choices. They need choices. The bottom line is children need access to quality education, right? So I can't speak to the positives and negatives of charter schools. That's not my area of expertise. But if we open up that dialogue, we have to be prepared to respond to it. And it's also, is that forum the right forum to have that dialogue? And I think that's a larger question. Like, it feels like everything is open dialogue on social now. And I see so many conversations where even between like people that I know, where I'm like, okay, they're going back and forth with each other. And I know if they sat down and had a conversation, this might have gone differently. So for me, like I might take a more hesitant approach as a communicator and a marketer. Like I understand the importance of sharing information and getting it out there, but at the same time, like I'm always action oriented or change oriented. What is going to create the most change and where how are we going to get closer to either a shared perspective, or if there's not a shared perspective, how do we get closer to finding a compromise or something that's going to work? I think increasingly over the years, my concern as a marketer is that if a company is ready to tackle a topic, a controversial topic, then more power to them. But you got to have the resources and the plan to back it up, because you got to have a crisis plan. Like if anything can go wrong, you got to have a crisis plan before it does, because we know how quickly things can blow up now. So I don't know. I think I answered your question, but ultimately, these are all things that we're talking about. It's just a matter of if we're choosing to comment on it publicly, is that going to yield a positive result or just continue to stir the pot?
Yeah, and I think that's you did answer the question, and I appreciate the perspective because this is something that, depending on an organization or even a nonprofit, or a for-profit company, social media can be a beast, right? And if you are already talking about or in a space that talks about something that might be controversial on its face, social media can just add to that, add gasoline to that fire. So it's a good kind of commentary that as marketers, we just need to be conscious and be aware, have a crisis plan, be prepared, like you said. And for nonprofits who maybe don't have those resources to be able to have a full-fledged crisis plan or have people, monitoring social media 24/7 to be able to respond to issues, then that may be, they may want to not be as controversial. Oh, but I think we can all agree, whether it's a charter school or a public school or some other form of education, there's good and bad in everything. There's charter schools that are great, that are perfect, that are very, community oriented and have successful outcomes, and then there are others that are not so great. And public schools all have different challenges, like you
Yep.
mentioned earlier. So but we need those options and parents need those different choices. And, like you said, not everybody can afford to go to a charter or private school. And so I think this initiative is very important. You mentioned teachers being one of your audiences. Have you gotten good feedback from them? Do you have kind of teachers who sort of advocate on behalf of this initiative?
So we do see like reposts and shares from teachers, but I think, I just want to take a moment and like number one, recognize the incredible work that teachers do. Number two, they are severely underpaid. And I like have friends who are teachers. One of my team members, her husband's a teacher, and like so we have seen engagement, but honestly, they're just trying to get through the day right now, right? They're trying to do more with less. They're trying to manage a bunch of kids. They're trying to operate and like let's just call it what it is. We're in a divisive environment right now. It doesn't matter which side you're on. We're in a divisive environment, and you have young minds who may be hearing it at home, maybe not, maybe hearing it from their friends, right? The response, like, I think about me, quote unquote, babysitting for my soon to be 13-year-old niece, 7-year-old, and 4-year-old nephew, and I'm overwhelmed. And then I think about a teacher managing for how many hours a day all these young children. So, yes, we've seen positive feedback from them, but at the same time, like, I don't know that they even have time to pay attention, right? And I don't blame them for that. They deserve a ton of recognition, and that's not just public school, right? That's private school. I don't care where you're at. Like, teachers do important work, and I think that a lot of times they don't get the credit they deserve, and it's just hard, right? So yes, but I will say for the most part, I would say we see more engagement from like administrators, whether that's superintendent or principal level or even like curriculum director level. We do see quite a few submissions from like communications departments at schools or contacts. But we also get some submissions from superintendents and principals, so, um
My son's girlfriend is a 3rd grade teacher in
Oh.
IPS. So
Oh, yeah.
I completely understand. I've gone in and been a mystery reader for her classroom and, read them books
Nice.
and hung out and, with them on the, playground for recess or in the classroom doing different activities and things like that. It is definitely, I think the frustration for me is when people, negative commentary about schools and they've never been in a school. Like you said, you don't know it until you live it, right? Until you're in there and see what is happening on a daily basis and all of the things that teachers do, not just inside the classroom, but outside the classroom as well, whether that be grading outside of the classroom or using their own money to shop for
School
supplies
supplies.
for their classroom or attending events,
Yeah.
football games or, the book fair or whatever. I agree with you. Teachers deserve all of the credit in the world, and they don't nearly get enough these days. So they're dealing with a lot.
Yeah, they are. And plus on top of, like, all their professional development, responsibilities and, like, trying to figure out how they're gonna make a living during the summer. Yeah, they do. They do.
Round of applause for the teachers.
Yes, yes.
Well, very good. Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate you talking to us about this initiative and giving us a little bit of a background on what they've been doing from a marketing perspective. And for those of you who are listening, if you want to go online and look for Our Public Schools Work, like I said, they have a website and they're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. So make sure you go out and follow them and share their message. So I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Thank you.